أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى عترة الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you for joining us again on Real Talk. Today my guest is Madiha Raza. Assalamu alaikum Madiha.
Alaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah, good, thank you. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah. Thank you for accepting our invitation to join us on Real Talk.
No, it's my honor. Thank you for having me.
Alhamdulillah. If I can ask you to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you do to start off with.
So I am an aid worker. That basically means I work with an international NGO. Well, right now I work for WF Aid, which is the humanitarian department of the World Federation. And that, well, right now that basically entails sort of looking at WF Aid's overall sort of strategic direction, taking care of the operational side of things. But in terms of what the day-to-day work actually involves and sort of what an aid worker does, it's very much sort of looking at poverty alleviation and disaster response. So when, for example, a natural disaster occurs in a country around the world, or conflict, the people that are affected, those that are living in poverty, are the ones that we try and help to whatever extent we can, but also more sort of long-term sustainable development projects where people are trapped in the cycle of poverty, and we try and implement projects to try and help lift themselves out of poverty. So whether that's education projects or sort of long-term water solutions or livelihood programs to help people sort of work their way out of the cycle of poverty. That kind of
So do you actually go to these different places and try to sort of figure out what's needed? How do you assess people? How do you assess the need? And is it just on you, or is there a team of you that go?
No. So, well, I mean, in my role right now at WF Aid, it's a lot less sort of emergency travel compared to what I was doing before. Before I was doing a lot of disaster response. I was sort of the disaster response focal person. So I would go out and be the person that would assess the need on the ground and communicate the situation back to the team in the UK where the headquarters was. Here at WF Aid, I'm more sort of in a slightly senior position. So I'm more doing a lot of overall strategic stuff. But we have teams all around the world. We work with agencies on the ground, and we basically ask them to carry out the needs assessment because they obviously have a lot better context of what the situation is on the ground. But when I used to go out there, and when I would go out there now, you know, I would be the one that would be looking at what the situation is and helping the teams on the ground to formulate a project to implement with regards to sort of disaster response stuff.
Okay, so I think a few questions come into mind. One is obviously, how much of a role does your gender play, or is it for or against the whole project, and how difficult have you found it going in as a woman? And secondly, the language barrier. I'm sure that must have played quite a huge part in it as well.
The gender one's interesting because actually a lot of people ask me that. It's actually a major advantage. So in most disasters, women are almost always more adversely affected. Whether that's just because they're the ones that are the sort of the headers of the household, or for example in a conflict situation, often the men will go off to war, the women are left to look after the household, earn a livelihood. Often there are major atrocities that get perpetrated against women. So for example, if you look at the Rohingya Crisis, where a lot of women were, I don't know whether I can say this at this time because it's 8 o'clock. Yeah, it should be fine. But you know, a lot of them were raped, a lot of them were attacked. You know, in Iraq, for example, a lot of the families had were female-headed households because the men went off to war. So as a woman, I'm able to sort of help and provide a sense of comfort and just be more sensitive to the needs of those on the ground that are being affected more than a man. You know, I'm able to sort of hold their hand and ask them what they need. Ask, you know, just to give them a comfort that I think a man couldn't offer. But in terms of being a woman in the team, I'm often the only woman in the team, because there aren't a lot of women that actually do this kind of work. But it's never been unsafe. In that way, it makes it more safe. There's always a security detail, especially if it's a conflict area or a high risk area. And then in terms of language, yes, so that is an issue. I'm learning. So in a lot of the countries in the Middle East, obviously, Arabic is a major thing, and it's always so frustrating that I don't know Arabic. But I am learning Arabic for that very reason. But there's always obviously local people on the ground that can act as a translator. So that is what makes it a bit easier. But of course, the language barrier is an actual barrier when you're trying to just speak to someone, human to human, and ask them what their experiences have been. Having to go through a third person makes it a little less personal. Whether I can't hear what you're saying because you're on mute, so I don't.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to ask. You said you're normally the only woman in the team. How are you perceived by, especially going into these sort of Arab countries where it's obviously very male dominated? Do you feel that they listen to you? Are you given the respect? Are you actually, like, you're obviously going in as head of the team, sort of thing. Is that recognized by them? How difficult is that?
It depends where I'm going. Often no. Often it's very much like, oh no, you can't. For example, when I went to Syria, I wanted to go to northern Syria where the siege is in Idlib. And they're like, oh no, you can't go there. You're a woman. And I'm like, I've been to worse places. I've been to worse, like, war zones, and I've done things a lot worse than this. In that way, but they're like, oh no, you can't go. But the men could go. So it's just one of those things. There was actually a massive conversation on Twitter with a lot of the female leadership of the sector, talking about exactly these challenges that women seem to face in the sector. Even though it's quite female dominated in terms of the number of women that are working in the sector, but in terms of at leadership positions, there aren't that many women. But yeah, it's difficult because sometimes you have to work twice as hard to get your voice heard to the same extent as a man would. You have to be on a different level of eloquence. You have to command or demand respect, and it's quite tiring sometimes, actually. But yeah, it's an interesting question.
So I suppose I would then ask, why do this work? What's your motivation, especially when you're sort of trying to fight all these sort of gender biases and things?
The work, of course, it's amazing work. When you're seeing things on the news, as an example, with the Rohingya crisis, or what we're seeing in Yemen at the moment, or just all these crises and levels of poverty we see around the world. To be able to actually go and do something hands-on is just, it's not, for me, it's not work. I don't wake up every day thinking, oh man, I have to go to work. It's very sort of fulfilling. It's very, it's almost a sense of duty. I feel like while I can go and do these things, then I absolutely should, especially, as I said, because I feel like I can add a different value than a man can in many of these instances. And I mean, I'll give you an example of, when I went to Iraq in Mosul in July of 2017, which was just after ISIS left, or they were still there actually, but only in small pockets. I went to a camp in southern Mosul where there were 8,000 families in a refugee camp in Hamam al-Alil refugee camp, and it was like 51 degrees. It was sweltering hot, and the camp was largely just women and children. And of course, a lot of the women that were in these tents or in this refugee camp were from very conservative societies within Iraq that had been displaced because of the war. And we were a team of men, and then myself and one other woman. So to go into these tents or be invited into these tents and speak to these women, as I said, it just added a completely different value than a man could. You can actually sit with them and they'll tell you about the atrocities that happened to them. And that their needs, that especially women, female sensitive needs in particular. As an example, in refugee camps, obviously when at nightfall, even for example, going to the bathroom is dangerous because you have to walk amongst all the tents and you have to go and find somewhere far away. So these are little things that, as a woman, I can help more than a man can, and that's why I feel like it's almost a sense of duty in that way.
So then the next question would be, how your family feel? How do your family feel about it?
You know, I'm very, very. I get asked this question a lot. I'm very, very blessed to have very, very supportive parents. They know that it's my passion, and I think for them, as long as they know that I'm taking the right sort of precautions to be safe, they sort of trust that I will be. And for them, you know, whenever someone asks them, "Oh, how do you let her go off to conflict zones, etc." For them, it's like, well, if something happens to her, you know, if she God forbid passes away doing what she's doing, then that's for me, that's an honor, really, in a way. There's sort of more honor in that than, you know, something happening here and me being 6 foot under, not having done anything worthwhile, if that makes sense.
You know, I totally agree. How does it impact your life and your other relationships?
It hasn't so much in the way that, I mean, because I travel a lot, I mean, I travel a lot because I can, but in that way, it hasn't really affected any other relationships. I mean, before, you know, for example, when I first started out in this career path, I wasn't traveling as much as I was now. I graduated from London, and then I went into the sector, but I wasn't doing much travel. Then I moved to Sweden for 2 years because I'd gotten married. And then
sorry, can I just ask? Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
You said you graduated. What did you graduate in? Is it this work related, or is it something different?
Yeah. So my undergrad was in international politics, and then my master's was in international development. And then I went on to do a couple of internships at different NGOs. And then I got into sort of paid work. So I was working at Islamic Relief and then Malaria Consortium. And then I got married and moved to Sweden for 2 years. And I did work there for a little while too, but my marriage didn't work out. So I moved back here to London. And that is when I sort of really got into the more disaster zone response work, a lot more than what I was doing before, which was more sort of long-term development stuff. So it was very high octane stuff when I got back from Sweden. Okay,
so again, please just share as much as you want to share. How did you feel when your marriage didn't work out, and what were your coping mechanisms, and you know, how did you move forward from that?
My marriage not working out was, of course, the most difficult thing I've ever been through, and I think it's probably one of the most difficult things that a lot of people would go through if they ever were unfortunate to go through it. It was something that completely broke me as a person, but my work and this work was something that really helped in terms of to distract me, to heal me, and that's why I'm very thankful for it. You know, to be able to sort of just forget all of what was going on and just be able to do something productive that's meaningful. I feel was very much a massive role in me getting past the personal side of things.
So I suppose in a way, when Allah tells us with hardship there is ease, you could see the ease from the work that you were doing, with the hardship obviously going through the divorce that you were going through.
Yeah. You know, I think I mean, in that way, you know, I think tawakkul plays a massive role in this kind of thing. I think, you know, often you might not understand why you're going through what you're going through, but just accepting it and embracing it is such a relief, because you just literally hand the situation to Allah and you get on with life. You know, you just need to embrace that this is the will of God, and you need to get on with whatever it is that you can to I guess heal. And I think that's what I mean when I say that work for me was a massive part of that. And so in that way, I'm very thankful that I was blessed with the opportunities that I've had in that way.
I think that's such a powerful and beautiful sentiment, you know, where you're looking at it as opportunities sent by Allah, and taking those opportunities and actually seeing the positive in the hardship that you're going through, and not just sort of sitting back and feeling sorry for yourself. I'm sure there must have been times when you actually did feel sorry for yourself, because that's human nature. but the fact that you didn't just get stuck in that and you actually took the opportunities that God sent, I think that's such powerful learning for all of us, to sort of look for opportunities when we're going through hardship, because there are always opportunities that Allah sends us.
Yeah, I definitely think that, you know, obviously everything happens for a reason, and it could be that if I was still, I don't know, in Sweden, you know, still in the situation that I was, that I wouldn't be able to do all of this amazing work that I am able to do right now, and reach out to the people around the world that I'm able to right now. So I'm sure there's some khair in everything, you know. So maybe that's what Allah's answer was to this situation.
I think just playing devil's advocate, I'm thinking, you know, when people look at you and the work that you do, they must think you're such a sort of strong, independent woman, and it's like, how would you sort of fit in a married life if you were to get, you know, married again, and would you sort of settle down, or would you want to continue with this sort of work? How do you see that working out in your future?
I was actually speaking to some friends about this, some other unmarried friends as well, and I feel like there's a misconception within society that if you're strong and independent, that you can't also be a sort of caring, emotional wife as well. For me, you know, whilst I was married, I used to hate being away from my husband. So if I was to get married again, I don't think I would be traveling as much as I am now, if at all. But of course, that is something that would, you know, be a conversation between myself and him. But for me, I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I don't see why you can't be strong and independent, but also, you know, have a very blissful married life at the same time. Because although I've become a lot stronger and a lot more independent since I was last married, not to say that I wasn't whilst I was married before as well. And I think that as a community, that is not something that should be in the minds of people. Because I remember, okay, as an example, and this is obviously something quite personal that I'm sharing, I was speaking to someone, I don't know, last year I think it was, and I was told by one of his friends that he was told, oh, you know, she's not the type that would have dinner on the table at home every day. And and when I found out, I was so outraged, because when I was married, I literally did have dinner on the table every day. But also I was able to work. And I think this is the beauty of a woman. You're able to fulfill all of these roles very, very well at the same time. You're able to sort of work full time, and you're able to maintain your household, and you can be a fantastic daughter and a fantastic daughter-in-law and a fantastic sister. I think that is the power and strength of a woman, that you can fulfill all of these roles at the same time without actually neglecting any of them to any extent. And then eventually, obviously, a motherhood as well. And I think, you know, that's something that people can't seem to get their head around.
I think that's very culturally based, because if you look at it from an Islamic perspective, it's like you look at Bibi Fatima alayhi salam, Bibi Khadija alayhi salam, Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, you know, they were all very, very strong women. And you know, and you saw that when the need arose, and it's like they didn't just sit back and sort of, oh, I can't do this and it has to be a man who does it. It's like when the need arose, they were there. But you know, when the need wasn't there, then they played the roles as wives and mothers and so forth. So you're very, you know, right in saying that, you know, we can be all these different roles at different times of our lives, depending on the life situation that we find ourselves in. And I think a lot of it is very culturally based in like, oh, you know, if you're not married, then you should just sit back and just wait until marriage happens, instead of, you know, actually continuing with your life and taking the opportunities that God sends your way to sort of better yourself and become, you know, a sort of better Muslim and give back to society as well.
Yeah, I think in the community, marriage happening is sort of taken for granted, as it's kind of, people feel like, okay, that's the natural next milestone in life. Whereas I don't think any of us are guaranteed any of these types of things. And I was saying to my friend the other day that I think there are only certain things in life you can control. You can control, you know, your own health to some extent. You can control your career to some extent. Marriage and love and things like that are something that you can't control. That I feel like it's very much from Allah. So if you sit there and just wait for it every single day and get depressed about the fact that it's not happening, or for whatever reason, then you're just going to put yourself in a cycle of, you know, depression. And I feel like you do need to just take the other opportunities and blessings in life that Allah sends your way, and, you know, use them to, as you said, you know, just build yourself up, refine yourself as a person, I don't know, I just feel like it's not something that's guaranteed in life, so we shouldn't sit there and sort of think that it's gonna happen for all of us. And it might happen, it might not, I don't know. But for me, it's not something that I necessarily focus on a lot, because I don't see the point of obsessing over it if it's going to come from Allah eventually anyway, if it does.
I think that's so true. And I think you're right. It's like, we have a sort of set plan in our lives and in our minds, where we grow up and we're going to go through some sort of education. And once you've educated, then you have to get married. And once you've had, you've got married, you have to have kids. And it's sort of, and if it doesn't play out like that, then we're sort of not serving our purpose. And it's so sad, because that's not our purpose in life. It's like those are opportunities sent by Allah, again, to serve Him, whether He chooses to allow me to serve Him as a wife or as a mother or as Masuma herself, or it really doesn't matter. As long as I can serve Him, it really doesn't matter in which role I serve Him. And I think we forget that, and we get so hung up when one of these roles isn't fulfilled, because we so expect it.
Yeah, and I feel like, I was saying this to someone the other day as well, that often we're expected to have like a 5 or 10 year plan. And although you do need to plan for your future to some extent, if you had asked me 5 years ago where I'd be, it certainly wouldn't be where I am now, because 5 years ago I was still married, and I would have planned for a family and this and that. And I just feel like if you obsess again too much on the future and what's going to happen, then you can't live in the present enough. And I feel like life can turn upside down within minutes, which is what happened with me, which I know is what happened with a lot of people. And you just don't know what's going to happen at the next minute or the next hour or the next day or the next few years. So you need to sort of take control of what is happening in your life at the moment and at the present, and live very much in the present to some extent, of course. And otherwise, I feel like, as you said, if it doesn't follow a certain trajectory, then I think it can get very depressing for people.
And I think one of the things that you said, which sort of maybe I'll think about it a little bit more, is like you're saying you take control of your life, but we really don't have control of our lives to a certain extent. It's like we sort of make decisions on where we find ourselves, but knowing that God is actually in control. And I think one of the things that you said earlier was having that tawakkul, where you're having that total trust that Allah is doing what is best for you. And even though it may not look like it's best for you, there is some care in it, there is some growth in it, there is a reason you're going through what you're going through, even if it is to do with the choices of others. Allah doesn't abandon you. He gives you the tools to be able to handle it and grow from it.
Exactly.
So I think
by what I said in terms of what taking control of your life, I didn't necessarily mean that the control was not in Allah's hands. I meant more there are only certain things, the decisions, as you said, that you can control. You can control your own decisions, but there are some decisions that you can't control. And I guess it's how you react to what happens after you make those decisions is what makes or breaks you to some extent. I, for example, could have sat and wallowed in my own self-pity, or I could have, and this is the thing, for everyone it's different. Everyone reacts to things differently. I'm not someone that I'm quite hard on myself when I go through things like this and I start getting upset or I start wallowing. I don't like going down that path. So for me, it was very much like, snap out of it, get on with things. And you know what, I remember watching quite recently, I think a year ago, watching a clip by Sayyid Asad Jafri, and he talks about the privilege of faith, and it's such a beautiful way of looking at it, because faith is such a privilege. Without faith, I wouldn't have gone through it. Without faith and knowing Allah's there and not understanding anything at the time, but knowing that there is a reason and that there's a nizam and there's a plan, knowing that is what I feel tawakkul is. Not understanding anything, not having any tangible understanding of what the situation is, but still accepting it, I feel is what is the real meaning of, hopefully, is the real meaning of what tawakkul is, and that's the only thing that got me through it. And that's real privilege to have that faith, to have grown up with that faith that my mom and dad put into me. Because I don't know what people without faith do in situations like that. I don't know how they get through it, So alhamdulillah.
I think that's really, really powerful. And I think the thing is, honestly, we really don't have any choice but to accept, because sometimes we can't change our life situation. So to actually accept it, knowing that God has either chosen this for us, or God has given me the tools to be able to handle this, and God knows that I have the strength to be able to handle it, or has given me the strength to be able to handle it, gives you that sort of empowerment that you need at such difficult times. So I think most people will eventually accept it because they really have no choice but to accept it. But when you actually choose to accept it, because knowing that God's there in the picture makes you much more sort of empowered within yourself.
Yeah, and this is the thing with my work, going back to that for a minute. Some of these people I work with or I've seen on the ground have lost everything, like literally everything, whether it's, we're just talking about me having, gone through a divorce and lost my husband, in comparison to that, these people have lost their husbands, their homes, their children, their entire families, their businesses. They've been, all they've got is the clothes on their back, and they've had to run across borders and live in these little tents. And as I mentioned, in Mosul, as an example, it was 51 degrees. And they had to live under these sweltering tarpaulin tents, and there was no refuge from the heat, because if you're outside the tent, the heat's bearing down on you. If you're inside the tent, it's sweltering. I was feeling at the time as if I'm going to pass out, and I have to go back into the car every 15 minutes to sort of cool down. And for me, you know what, these people are still they're so resilient. They're still saying Alhamdulillah. And that for me is just, it's mind-blowing when you think, oh God, the issues that we all go through in life are so minor in comparison to what these people have to face on a daily basis. And it brings so much perspective. Not that I feel like I want to make myself feel better off the back of someone else's misery, but it just brings a different perspective. Because if these people can have lost literally everything in their lives and still say Alhamdulillah, then for us there's no reason to complain about anything, really.
What would you say to people who sort of ask you, when you see such devastation and you see people going through so much, does that question not come into your mind, is where is God? Why is God not helping them? Why has God put them through that? Do these sort of questions arise, or how would you answer these questions to people who ask you things, something like that?
I think that question comes from a lot of from people that don't have faith or don't believe in faith. And I feel like the people that have lost everything or are living in poverty have a lot less to be accountable for. Allah might have put them through all of these hardships, but again, as you said, the people, they're not given the tool. They're given the tools to be able to handle it. But I feel like when it comes to it, then they're going to be a lot less accountable for all of their possessions, all of their lives, because they've had to go through these trials. But here we are in the West, Alhamdulillah, we're living in luxurious surroundings. We've got the wealth, we've got ourselves, and I think for us, it's our duty to be able to help them. It's our honor, it's our duty. It's not the other way around. We're not giving them a helping hand. They're helping us in that way. It's an amana that through us, inshallah, we are able to help these people. I feel like beautiful. Yeah, I feel like many of us. I'm in a privileged position because I can go and do these things. Many people aren't, and they often say, we wish we could do this kind of thing too. But in that way, some people are positioned in different places to be able to do different things and play different roles in life. And I think,
I think that's really beautiful to actually sort of look at these opportunities as opportunities where Allah's actually using us as tools to help the rest of His creation, rather than us doing creation a favor.
Yes,
and that's really, really beautiful. We have a question here. Someone's written in, mashallah, what a beautiful, heartful, fulfilling job that you have. Do you feel having seen the disaster zones and those less fortunate than yourself has been a help to you in accepting your own circumstances?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this trip to Mosul I mentioned, the reason I mentioned it was because it was my first sort of trip after my situation when I got back from Sweden, and it was almost one of the worst. The entire city was completely destroyed. It was completely full of rubble, and there were all these men, women, and children that had been through, so many of them had been, for example, kidnapped and tortured by ISIS, and it was just horrific. And as I said, the resilience I saw, either in these people or those I've seen in Greece that had fled Syria, or those within Syria that had sort of seen unimaginable things. Or for example, you know, in Indonesia after the earthquake and tsunami, they're still so faithful. They say they're so accepting of their situation. They say, oh, this is all from Allah, what can we do? Alhamdulillah, they say. And it's just, I mean, it's so inspiring. And so, yeah, I mean, if they can say that, then it's such a lesson, isn't it? Imagine if they were saying that and I was still sitting here thinking, oh, why Allah did this happen to me? That would just be so pointless for me to be there and see all of this stuff and not be accepting of my own situation. It's a lesson.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. And I think in the West, we have certain expectations that, you know, we expect this to be this way and we expect that to be that way. And when it's not, it's like, we may say the Alhamdulillah, but it always comes with a but. It's like, Alhamdulillah, but.
yeah.
But so yeah, it's so true. Just thinking about the fact that, okay, so you work for WF, which is obviously a very Khoja sort of, like, it seems like
it
for those of us who are outside it, yeah, it's a Khoja institution, but I feel like maybe, you know, being outside of it, it may be perceived as a very much a sort of a man's world, because it's most of the sort of leadership roles are obviously there which have been fulfilled by men and obviously by Khojas. So coming as a woman and secondly a non-Khoja, how was that experience?
Well, I bet a lot of people don't know that I'm not Khoja. A lot of the people that are in leadership positions within WF, and I'm sure they'd be surprised to know.
I'm so sorry, I've put that out there.
No, not at all. It's not like I'm hiding it, but it's funny. It would just be funny to see their reactions, because there are a lot of people within the community that don't think I should be in this position as head of WF because I'm not Khoja. I have faced a lot of racism. Well, not a lot. I have faced some racism where people say, you know, you're not Khoja, so you shouldn't be head of department or in a leadership position within WF.
They've actually said that to you to your face, or you've heard?
Yeah, someone actually ambushed me in this event. This one event said, you know, why you shouldn't be allowed to be head of WF Aid if you're not Khoja.
Wow.
And I was like, well, you know what? Bring someone else that is as experienced as me in the sector, and I'll be happy to step down. But for me, it was, you know, and it was funny because it was an event about Imam Hussein al-Islam and, you know, helping humanity and all of this and that. And so it was ironic. But I mean, I know for a fact that if I wanted to share other leadership positions, it wouldn't be taken well, you know. That's not to say, so my own managers or OBs or trustees have been very supportive, of course, of me being in this position. I was brought on by the OBs that just left yesterday, and they were all very supportive. And when I told them about these racist remarks, and they were all very angered by it. So the actual, you know, my actual managers or OBs in WF have been very supportive. But there have been a few community members that have been racist towards me. But, you know, I guess it comes with the territory. But with regards to gender, yes, that is a massive issue. That is something that the WF, I think, are trying to some extent to change. The issue is that there's a lot of, the way in which WF works is quite bureaucracy heavy. So it's very much controlled by the regions and what happens in the region. So if, for example, in a regional federation like Africa or India, Pakistan or Co-Ed, there aren't female leaders within the federation, then they can't make it as an OB or a trustee in the WF positions. So, you know, it is something that I feel the WF is trying to do more of, but I feel like the efforts need to be ramped up. I feel like more women need to step forward as well. And I understand that a lot of women could be put off by, you know, what they saw at the Exco, for example, which is, you know, a bunch of men over the age of 40, you know, basically just, you know, arguing a lot of the time. But I feel like had there been more women around the table, I don't think it would have even have gotten to that stage. So I would encourage a lot of the women in the community to step up, because it's important, I think, for the community to take ownership of their own institution. I mean, there's a lot of good that the WF does, and, you know, it's a shame that the youth are not feeling loyal or rallying around the cause of your own institution, essentially.
No, I agree. I think we're very, very lucky to have an institution like the World Federation, and I think we need to, one, support it, and secondly, if we're not happy about something, then we need to actually start doing something about it ourselves. And like you're saying, as women, if we feel like, okay, there is not enough women in high positions, then at least start with the regional boards and try to get in there. And even if it's just with our local jamaats, and moving forward from that, I think we are half of the society of the society, and yet we don't seem to have a say in what happens on the leadership tables, and that's
yeah. I mean, there's still some areas, some jamaats that don't allow female members or female votes, which is obviously a massive issue. When we're in 2020, this shouldn't be the case. But I mean, as we were talking about earlier, there are so many cases where you have to be a certain way to even get your voice heard. So there are a few women councillors who have quite a strong voice, and they're amazing women. But you'll see that the response to them are, oh, these women are aggressive, or these women are bossy. It's like, oh no. So if a man said this thing, they wouldn't be seen as aggressive or bossy. But a woman says it, and she's aggressive or bossy. I was speaking to a friend the other day, and it was so funny because you have to say certain things to men sometimes in a certain way to not offend them. For example, as an example, one of the phrases I often use, and I'm speaking to some of my female colleagues about this, one of the phrases I often use is, please help me to understand XYZ. It's not sort of a passive aggressive way of saying, what the hell are you talking about? So it's funny because sometimes you have to speak a certain way to get your voice heard, whereas you wouldn't have to do that normally. It's an annoying, but it's part of life and getting your voice heard. Often you can be spoken down to because you're a woman, and it's, as I said, you have to work twice as hard sometimes to get to certain positions. And yeah, that shouldn't be the case, I guess.
But I think as women, we're the only ones who can really change that. I mean, even if I'm in a jamaat which doesn't allow me to vote, then as women, we should be making that noise, not waiting for the men to decide that they're going to give us the voting rights.
But the men are the decision makers sometimes. So
I agree, but I feel like we don't make enough noise. I mean, like in our own houses, we do, and we get our men to do what we want most of the time. But when it comes to jamaat level, or when it comes to leadership roles, I feel like as women, we've been sort of told so many times that this should be left to the men. And you know what, if I have the ability to, and if I have the opportunity, then why would I not take that on board? Especially because the hijab allows me to sort of maintain my respect and keep the barriers there, and then take on specific roles and actually fulfill these roles where our voices are heard.
Exactly. And I think what needs to happen more of is, okay, if we're expecting women in the community to fulfill a certain gender role within the home, so to be a mother, to be the caregiver, as an example, then you also need to make those allowances within the workspace, or within, as an example, WF, for her to be able to fulfill both. So as an example, I'm head of WF Aid. So my team, if there's a mother or a father in my team that has children, then for me, I will do whatever I can to make sure that she can fulfill, or he can fulfill, his or her role as a mother or father, and work at the same time, however they need to. So I have, for example, as part of my team, a young mother, who's got a 1-year-old child. For me, as long as you get the work done, work from home if you have to, bring the child in if you have to. I don't care, as long as you get the work done. So as an example, for leadership positions, as an example, these executive council meetings go on, from morning till way past midnight sometimes, and that's not always practical for caregivers or someone that's a mother. So these allowances need to be made. You need to have gender sensitive training, I guess, sensitivity training, and allowances within institutions to allow women to participate more, because I feel like, the institutions, or just generally, even just across the world, I'm not talking about WF, there aren't allowances for women to be both a mother and a career woman. And I feel like, as I said, you can be both to some extent without having to neglect either.
So. And I think, like you said, things are changing slowly, but it is changing, alhamdulillah. And I think it's also up to each woman to decide what role she wants to play and whether she wants to take that role on, and whether whether that's what she sees herself doing. I don't think it's for every woman. I think it's for different women and what they feel is right for them in their life situation that they find themselves in.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always said if I was ever to be a mother, I wouldn't want to actually work the first few years until the child's at school or whatever. And so, as I said, it's completely dependent on the woman and her own whatever her circumstances are. But if we live in a world where often one salary isn't enough to run a household, as an example. So what I meant to say is, if a woman does need to work or wants to work and be a mother, then we need to make the concessions at the workplace to allow for both, to an extent, or just allow women to participate in these community institutions because their voice is important. And if she's a mother, then we need to make sure that we're putting in the concessions to allow her to work around her duties as a mother.
Yeah, no, for sure, I agree totally. Going back to some of the things that you've talked about, what that you've seen on the ground, and all the devastation and everything how does that affect you? Because as women, we're a lot more empathetic and a lot more emotional. Do you sort of carry that with you, or how are you able to let that go and just continue with living your life in the West, which is so easy?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot, and actually, I think there's a statistic that said 40% of humanitarian aid workers need some kind of therapy. For me, it's very much, as long as I see it on the news and I'm aware of a disaster or some sort of situation like this happening, and it pulls on my heartstrings and I want to go and help. For me, that's where I know I haven't lost, my humanity. Whereas when I'm actually out there and able to help hands-on, it's emotional, of course, but you almost have to put that aside to get the work done. I guess it's kind of maybe like how doctors work, where you see someone in pain and you just have to sort of put that aside and get on with it. Whereas if it was your own family, it might be different. I think for me, it's a similar kind of situation. In the sector, you're encouraged to, for example, when you've been in a disaster zone or you've seen sort of atrocities, to take out time and process and have rest and recovery and that kind of thing, because there are a lot of things that we see that is horrific, and I can give you some examples if you want to know. But the stories that a lot of the women especially tell us of the things they've been through is sometimes it's the stuff of nightmares, and it's important to take the time to just process it, I think, before we come back here. And actually, it's a aid worker guilt thing, where, for example, we'll be in a refugee camp, and it's very squalid conditions, and then we have to come back to our plush hotels with a comfy bed and a hot shower, and it's such a dichotomy sometimes. But it's part of the territory, I guess, to some extent. Because as an example, the hotels that you have to stay in have to be secure, they have to be safe, and they're normally in areas where there's a lot of poverty and crime, etc. So there's a lot of dichotomy. But you're right, it brings perspective, I guess, to go and see these things and then come back to our own sort of houses and families in the West.
I suppose it really makes you appreciate everything that we actually have and not take it for granted.
No,
when you see
it definitely does. For me, I don't know why, but my sister, who you spoke to a few weeks ago, she has 3 young sons, and I always think of them when I'm on these trips, because they're always often young children who have fled war and natural disasters and all of these kind of things. And these children are always still smiling and happy with their one little toy they managed to sort of grab while they were on the run. And I always think of my nephews, and I think, they're so privileged and they're so lucky, and I always make sure to come back and remind them of that as well when I come back. But yeah, it definitely brings so much perspective, and allows us to be very thankful of what we do have here compared to a lot of people around the world. So yeah, a lot of gratitude and appreciation.
How does it make you? I mean, obviously, you know, you go out there with the best of intentions and you want to help everyone, but a lot of the times you probably can't, or you can, you know, you help them to a certain extent, and they still, you don't go away giving them an amazing life.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? Because again, it's like it must be quite frustrating, you know, sort of trying to get stuff done and maybe having a lot of red tape and politics that come into play and things like that. How do you work through all of that?
So normally in these situations, especially, so I guess we're talking more about sort of disaster zone situations where, you know, you do like a rapid needs assessment where you literally do a survey of what the immediate needs are. So often it's quite standardized. It's shelter and then basic hygiene packs, basic food packs, and water. They're sort of the bare minimum that a human being needs in sort of the immediate response following a disaster. But then as an NGO that does this kind of work, you do plan for sort of short, medium and long-term recovery following a disaster. So you do know that at least you'll be working towards helping these people rebuild their lives. So as an example, after the tsunami and earthquake in Palu in Indonesia in 2018, you know, you got there and you go and help the people in the refugee camps with the bare minimum. You do distributions of food and water and hygiene packs, as I said. But then you do, with the local teams, plan for temporary shelter, so made of bamboo, for example, latrines, etc. And then as the sort of recovery of the disaster zone happens, then you can help shift people back into their homes and help rebuild those lives. So you know that there is a long-term plan. But you're absolutely right. And, you know, in Syria, as an example, there's, you know, the entire country is completely devastated. Where do you start? You've only got a finite amount of money and resources. Where do you start to help people? So it's very sort of whatever the need is at the time. In Yemen, as an example, the need is literally food and medical. I mean, education is needed, of course, shelter is needed, of course, livelihoods are needed, of course, and people keep saying, oh, you know, why are you just giving out food packs, or why are you just doing this? But that is the need on the ground right now. The immediate need is literally people starving. So in a sort of protracted crisis like this, you have to respond according to the need on the ground, and then you can look to rebuild infrastructure and communities and lives. And you have to pick and choose, you know, as an NGO, what is your speciality? Is your speciality food or education, or is it medical care? So it just depends on what your organization's specialty is as well, I guess, to some extent.
Do you feel there's a lot of politics or red tape that you have to go through, or do you feel like everyone's on the same boat and just there to help people, and it's sort of made easier for the NGOs who go there to help? Or do you feel like there's a lot that you have to actually fight through to get the aid there?
Yeah, no, it depends on the networks. It depends on the disaster management agency of the country in question. It depends on sort of almost who you know to some extent as well, and also your reach. So in countries like Syria, where there's sanctions and, you know, there's a lot of bureaucracy and you have to work through, you know, with the permission of the government, etc. There's a lot of red tape there. So for example, you know, to get funds to Syria right now with the bank de-risking and sanctions is very, very, very difficult. So you have to work through authorized organizations to do that. So that can be very frustrating. But the sector as a whole is looking at how to sort of tackle these issues. And one of the major issues, I think, especially in the Muslim charity sector, is how much competition there is between all the charities. And I think one of the things I want to do at WF-Aid especially is work more with other organizations to, you know, collaborate and have a larger impact. So yeah, there is a lot of bureaucracy, but yeah, I guess you have to work around it to some extent as well.
Inshallah. What advice would you give to someone who wanted to get into this sort of work, who was passionate about it? How would they start? What would be the first steps in order to sort of get to somewhere where they're actually hands-on?
So I guess it depends where in your career you are. I studied international development and international politics for my undergrad and masters, and that's obviously directly relevant to the sector. Every non-governmental organization or NGO has certain departments. It has a finance department, an HR department, programs department, the fundraising department. So I guess it depends where you want to go and what you want to do and what your expertise and skills are, depending on where you are in your career. The issue is with the charity sector that there is so much, that there isn't enough funding. So there are very few positions available. So experience is really, really important. And the issue is that not everyone can afford to do unpaid internships or, voluntary experience. But where you can volunteer or do an internship so that you can at least get your foot in the door within the sector and then work your way up. So for me, for example, I did a year of unpaid internships with 2 different NGOs, and then I worked in a health charity. It's called the Muscular Dystrophy Campaign, which was nothing to do with international development, but it was a paid role within the charity sector, which means a lot more. And then I moved on to Islamic relief, and then I moved to to Malaria Consortium and all these other places to then get to where I am now. So it was a long winding route, but sometimes you have to do things you don't want to do to get to where you want to be. So that's my advice, yeah. But also if anyone wants to, you can just reach out to me and I'm happy to help.
Thank you. That's really sweet. I'm sure you're going to get lots and lots of people reaching out, because I'm sure there are people out there who want to help but don't know how to. So yeah, inshallah. Talking about advice, if you sort of take in all your life experiences and everything that you've done and everything that you've seen with the work that you do and things like that, what would be sort of, if I was to ask you to give 3 pieces of advice to the viewers who are just living normal lives in the West, what would be your advice to them?
I think the first piece of advice would be to we all need to think beyond ourselves. There's such a big world out there. There are so many people that are in need of help. And I think just look beyond our immediate sort of needs. We need to look towards helping others, and every situation we're in, there's more we can do to help others and be there for others. And I feel like, I think there's a quote by the Prophet that says, and I'm paraphrasing, something along the lines of, I'm trying to think of the words now, but basically saying that, that if your neighbor is hungry, then you can't call yourself a Muslim to some extent, something like that. I'm paraphrasing completely. So I feel like, we need to look beyond ourselves. And then that, to go to the second piece of advice, is that, it helps you bring perspective in your life, and it helps you understand that whatever issues and trials you're going through, there are people that are going through worse, which doesn't always help to actually fix or make you feel better, but at least it gives you some kind of perspective in that way.
Okay, so if I can stop you there, because I just want to spend a little bit of time sort of looking at each of these advices practically, because I feel like we need to sort of take something away where we can actually practically implement it in our lives. So the first advice was to look beyond ourselves and look for where we can help other. Is it just Muslims or other human beings? Or
no, humans, not Muslims at all. In fact, I think, if you help non-Muslims, it as an ambassador for the religion, it shines a better light on you. So no, I think, as Allah says in the Quran, if you save one life, it says if you save humanity. He doesn't say save one Muslim life or one Shia life, does he? So
yeah, I think it is wajib for us all to sort of do tabligh and da'wah to others, to bring them, to sort of teach them what Islam is about. And maybe one of the ways we can do it is to show that, as Muslims, we're not just taking care of ourselves, we're taking care of the whole of creation, and that could be anything, from human beings to animals to the environment, everything. So yeah, I think that is really powerful. Again, do I have to do it in the way that you've done it, where I have to sort of go out there into the, into sort of war zones and help out, or can I do it in a smaller way?
Oh no, absolutely. I don't think many people probably could go out. So there's so many ways that, I think there's a hadith, and again, I'm not sure from who, I think the Prophet probably, that says, if you can't help with your hands, help with your heart, or dua. If you can't help with your heart, then help. Again, I'm paraphrasing. Say a dua as an example. So if you can't volunteer and add value, and for me, volunteering needs to add value. Often we volunteer, and the only person that adds value to is ourselves, because we feel like, oh, we're doing a really great job and we're doing something satisfying. You need to make sure the work you're doing when it comes to volunteering is actually adding value. So for me, flying off to, I don't know, Africa to teach English in an orphanage for 2 weeks adds no value, because you could use that money to train a teacher in Africa for a year, give her a job, and give the children in the orphanage consistency for a year. But so what I mean is, if you're adding value as a volunteer, then volunteer. If you can't add value as a volunteer, then if you've got the wealth to do so, then give some donations. Even £1, £5, it all makes a difference. If you can't do that, then at the very least say a prayer or raise awareness of the issue. As an example, with Yemen, what's happening now in Yemen, that this is very much, we live in the UK, and we're very blessed to live in a country where you can raise your voice, you can lobby the government, you can ask the UK to leverage its position to stop selling arms to Saudi Arabia, as an example. And if you can't do any of that, then just say a prayer, to stop the oppression around the world, which can make a difference.
So I suppose the advice is, first and foremost, try to actually do some sort of action, whether it's through volunteering, whether it's through sort of spending your wealth, or whatever you can, actually sort of go out there and try to do something, even if it's in a very small way, but do something. And if you can't, then at least use your words to help. And if you can't do that, then at least the least we can do is actually just pray for people who are in crisis and people who are going through so much torment and torture and devastation.
We've got so much on our own doorstep in the UK. I mean, as I mentioned to you earlier, I've been working with a charity called Hand on Heart here in the UK, who work to help alleviate some of the issues that the homeless are facing at the moment. So they give out packs of items that the homeless would need. And homelessness is on the rise here in the UK. There's so much you can do here in the UK. You don't need to flit off to war zones and disaster zones to be able to help. There's soup kitchens, there's food banks, there's so much to do here. So if you can, then do it here in your local communities.
Yeah, no, I suppose, and also I think one of the things I was just thinking about from what you said was actually doing it as a family. So when you come back and tell your nephews about it, rather than if they actually sort of took part in handing something to a homeless person, or working in a place where you see that sort of poverty, or that's it, actually being there and seeing it yourself and hearing about it is totally different, right?
And yeah, I mean, it was so sweet the other day. The skiing who you spoke to a few weeks ago, her second son, Sajad, I think it was about 4 now, yeah. They'd broken a toy of theirs or something, and I was like, oh, you know what, there's so many children around the world that don't have any toys. And he goes, oh, let's raise some money for them and send them some toys. And for me, I was like, oh my god, her work is done as a mother. Then for him to have said something like that, and it was so heart touching for him to have said that, because that's the empathy you want to instill in the children or the next generation. And exactly, there's so much that they can do hands on. So I know that they were also helping to pack these homeless items, and in that way, this charity Hand on Heart is great, because it really helps to mobilize the community and actually do something hands on, which I know a lot of people love to do. So definitely getting the family involved and doing it together is a really lovely way to spend time as a family.
I think that's really, really important, because again, I think as mothers, we're raising the next generation. So if we can sort of get them to be empathetic and actually understand what other people are going through, like you're saying, it goes on to your next point, where you actually realize how little what we're going through compared to what other people are going through. And again, we're constantly told that, whenever you're going through a hard time, think of someone who's worse off than you. And there's always someone worse off than us.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I wonder about that phrase, because I feel like I don't want to make myself feel better because of someone else's misery. But as I mentioned earlier, I feel like that it brings perspective to some extent, doesn't it? So
I don't think it's about sort of making yourself feel better about someone else's misery. For me anyway, what it does is it reminds me of people who are so much worse off, and maybe like that sort of makes me sort of put the focus on them and maybe do a dua for them or do something positive for them, and takes the focus off me and woe be me and poor little me and what I'm going through in my life.
Yeah. Often those people are going through whatever their hardships are, which are so much worse than yours, and coming out of it still being resilient, still thanking Allah, still saying Alhamdulillah. So I guess from what you're saying is, if they can say Alhamdulillah in their situation, then you can in yours as well. So
yeah, exactly. It's like, why can't I, and what's stopping me, and how can I look at it differently? How are they looking at it, which I'm not seeing? Because obviously they've got the bigger picture, they're seeing it, and I need to learn from them.
Yeah, no, agree, definitely.
Okay, so we've got, just do look past your own self, try to help with action, words, dua. Again, look at people worse off than you, and again, hopefully that will make us help them and do something that's worthwhile, but also put my life into perspective and maybe me learn from them as well. What would be your final advice?
Faith and tawakkul. Everything is so temporary. Everything is sent by Allah, and I think just to accept it and embrace it. I mean, question it if you have to, I feel, but accepting it makes it easier. Just handing everything to Allah and embracing His will lighten the load, I think, in everyone's.
I think that's easier said than done. Can you sort of maybe give a tip to the viewers on how you can bring about tawakkul in your life?
I almost feel like, as you said, how you said earlier, sometimes you don't have a choice but to accept what's happening. And I think at the point at which you realize, okay, the choice is not in your hands, and you need to, everything's ordained. So to accept it in the situation that you're in and be happy and pleased with His decree. I guess I don't know how one would go about actually doing that, except to actually remind yourself and recite those quite cliche verses of either the Quran or a hadith, which say, with hardship comes ease and Allah is with you, and all of these. Just remind yourself of these verses that have a lot of power when you actually ponder on them. But just understand that what, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you 70 times more than your own mother. So if He's put you in a position, it's for your own good. It's out of love. And for me, I think once you accept that in any difficulty and you hand it to Him and you say, Allah, you know what, you deal with it. I'm just going to be accepting of what you've decreed for me. Then, as I said, I feel like it lightens the load.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think I'm just trying to think, maybe it might be an idea to actually sort of think of these things before I find myself in a situation, because then it will actually, hopefully it'll be in my subconscious. So when I actually find myself in a situation that, I need to have that tawakkul, it's already subconsciously in me, one. And I think secondly, one of the things that you said was, the way that your parents brought you up. So again, having people in your life which can remind you, because a lot of the times to remind ourselves when we're emotional, when we're in situations where we're feeling sorry for ourselves, it's very, very difficult. So maybe having people in our life, so it's friends, family, just anyone who has that faith that when you're going through a hard time, it's like you can turn to this person and just talk to them, and they'll just put it all into perspective and bring God into the picture.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is, for me, any difficulties I've been through in life, my friends and family have been such rocks, and I'm very privileged to be surrounded by people that are people of faith and people that have that faith and they're able to remind you. Because as you said, when you're in the situation, it's difficult to see anything else. So definitely surround yourself with people that can sort of help you in those ways. And I think I was very blessed to be surrounded by people like that. So,
and I think it's important to know who to go to, and because as human beings, we're very social animals, and we need to sort of discuss things with people. But it's going to the right person and just having that reminder of the verses and the hadiths and things, which or just even sort of, okay, get over yourself. You know what? There are so many people worse off than you, and just that sort of wake up call is something. It's just something that we just sometimes need to hear.
To snap out of it sometimes. Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was in year 8 and I was going through a bit of a tough time with my friends. And I was just wallowing in my own self-pity for a good year. And my elder sister once just said to me, she goes, "Madiha, you need to just snap out of it now." And that, her saying that made me think, you know what? Yeah, I do need to snap out of it. And so sometimes you just need to.
I'm sure when she actually told you, you were like, oh my God, where's the sympathy? But then it's like when you think about it, you think, yeah, you know what? I really do need to snap out of it.
It's because it's scary, because once you're used to feeling a certain way, then to think, okay, now I need to let this issue go, and it's unfamiliar territory now. It's like, oh, now what do I focus all my energies and thoughts on? And I think it's unfamiliar and it's unsettling, and that's why people don't want to let go of pain and hardship sometimes. But then it's just a matter of actually recognizing that. I think sometimes
it becomes my story, right? And it's who I am. And if I let go of it, then I don't know who I am anymore, and I don't know how to move forward. So I think that's really, really powerful. Thank you so very much. I could continue talking with you for so much longer, but we've run out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. It's been such an eye-opener, and hopefully it's sort of geared us all into sort of trying to do something more. Obviously, there's so much that needs to be done, and hopefully, inshallah, this will sort of encourage us and motivate us to do more, look outside ourselves and help, others who need help. Because again, what we have is what God's given us to help others with. So, inshallah.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for accepting. Please join me next week for another amazing talk with another amazing, what we consider as normal women, but doing extraordinary things with their lives, with their life situations that they find themselves in. Thank you very much. If we can finish with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.